Good afternoon, everyone. This is Deb Curdy, the Education Programming Manager for the Coalition for Compassionate Care of California. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our CEO Transition Chat with Jennifer Ballantyne and Judy Thomas. Welcome. This is a members only live event right now, and so we welcome your questions, your comments. There will be a chat box for you to use, or you can put in the question and answer. We will be saving some time for you to do this after they both Jennifer and Judy get a chance to chat. Again, thank you for joining, and thank you for being members of the coalition. We welcome you. So I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer and Judy.
Great, thank you, Deb. As we get set up here, and thank you for everybody who's joining us today. We wanted to provide you with this opportunity to kind of hear about what's happening and to talk with us and ask any questions that you might have. We are really grateful to our members and to our donors who, without your support, the coalition wouldn't be around and we wouldn't be able to do our work. So it's really important. You're such a key part of our work. We're really excited to have this opportunity to just share with you kind of what's been happening and what to look forward to in the future. So Jennifer, should I pass it over to you?
Sure, awesome. You know, it's great to be here. I've been in the role now for just a couple of weeks, so getting my feet under me, and I'm very, very grateful, not only, as Judy said, for the members and for all of your support over the years, but also for Judy's support in this transition. It's a big job. It's a huge shoes to fill and a legacy to follow. So I'm very grateful for her guidance and willingness to be an advisor for a little while longer before we send her off into the peaceful fields of retirement. We thought it would be fun in this chat to do a little bit of memory lane stuff for both of us to get a little bit better acquainted, for me to get a little bit better acquainted with the history of CCCC as well as some of you, and then have an opportunity to introduce myself. So starting off, you know, I was trying to remember when it was that I first met you, Judy, and I think it was before 2009. I think it might have been 2007, 2008 at a National Pulse conference, and you were there giving a presentation on a study of utilization of Pulse in the nursing facilities. And I remember sitting in the back, still pretty fresh, still pretty new to the whole field, and thinking, I want to be her when I grow up.
Hey!
Kismet. So here we are. Funny how things work out. But I am curious, you know, it feels like CCCC has been around forever and that you've been its leader forever. So how did it all get started?
Great. Yeah. And before I jump into that, I do want to say, I think this is a little bit of a love fest here, Jennifer, because I am so grateful that the planets aligned, that you have the background that you have and that you were at the place to take on this role. Because one of my themes here is that sometimes magic happens for the coalition and the planets are aligned. And I really think this transition is one of those. I think that we met by phone before that. I remember having a conversation with you when you were in Colorado, and there was some discussion about a registry in Colorado. And that's the first conversation I remember. So it definitely goes way back to definitely the beginning of the Pulse work here in California. But going back to the beginning of the coalition, it was in the late 90s, around 1998. We grew out of another organization and out of one of the projects that they had. This other organization based in Sacramento was focusing on engaging the public in healthcare. And they had done work about, you know, bringing out conversations to the public about what do you think about care towards the end of life. This is when there were all those stats about all the money spent on care at the end of life and not really impacting the outcomes. They then went from engaging the public to engaging local hospitals and then engaging nursing homes. And that nursing home work really spread it kind of, it was not really so local, it was more statewide. And I was on the work group that developed the recommendations on end-of-life care in nursing homes. And I went on maternity leave, and then I came back, and they said, hey, we're going to pursue this grant, and it's going to be for the Coalition for Compassionate Care. So I was involved from the beginning and the precursor
Yeah.
with the development of those recommendations. I wasn't actually initially the first person doing the day-to-day work with the grant. And that grant was from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Community State Partnerships. It was designed to spur the creation of statewide collaborations around end of life. So that's kind of it in how the coalition started. Can definitely go way down into the weeds if we want to, with memory lane, but that's
But
it
then
in a
there
nutshell.
was a gap between that and when the Pulse stuff started.
Oh, yeah.
Really
This-
going. So
Yeah.
how did that come about?
Well, the first, the coalition started, we did get that grant, and that started in 98. And the Pulse work started in 2007. So there was really quite a bit of work that happened before that. The coalition's initial focus was nursing homes, education, and follow up to the recommendations, engaging the public. The Bill Moyer series came out on our own terms, and a lot of local coalitions got created. And so we worked with them to help, get that discussion groups around the Moyer series and professional education. So it was a little bumpy in the beginning about, how do we, it was actually like a couple years into the grant. Like initially it was easy because we had that grant and that's all we were focused on. And a couple years into this 3-year grant, I said to my co-chairs, Terry Hill and Marge Ginsburg, I said, hey, this is going to be done in a year. Like, are we done? And I'm going back to my regular job at the Hospital Association, or we want to keep going? And they're like, I don't think our mission will be completely achieved, that we will have totally changed the culture of end of life in California. So I said,
Took a little longer.
yeah. We were part of the Hospital Association. They were the agency that had that grant, and they were very good to us, providing us with a lot of support, covering staff time, and gradually over time, they weaned us into our own separate organization. So I wanted to give a big shout out to CHA because we wouldn't exist without that support they provided us.
So looking back over the, 24 years now, that's a number. What would you peg as the biggest accomplishments? The mission is not accomplished, otherwise we wouldn't be going forward. But overall, there have definitely been some milestones and big wins along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the biggest is Pulse. But before kind of jumping into that, because there's a lot of reasons why it's one of the biggest, there's just so many things along the way. When I was thinking back about things, even in the early days, when we developed our training for nursing homes, there was so much energy around it. And we had this comprehensive faculty of, 5 interdisciplinary faculty doing this 2-day training, and we required nursing homes to send a team of 3 to it. And the light bulb went on for people. And that's what's always exciting for me when people say, like, the light bulb went on. We worked on our CHIPS initiative, which was acute palliative care with UCSF and San Diego Hospice. Again, working with teams of 3 to help them establish these programs. We required the CEO to sign on to it. And people got assigned, attendees at each hospital got assigned to a faculty that stayed with them for a year and came out to their organization. So you had the outside expert coming to tell the local doctors, this is the best practice. Or work with developmental disabilities, or I learned so much when you talk to the people who often get excluded from conversations and we think maybe don't have anything to add. I learned a lot about our language, how we can and should talk in a way that, quite frankly, the average person doesn't understand what the doctor says to them. Are building bridges around cultural humility and competency. This was another one where some of our attendees said, what, this changed the way I think about how I interact with my neighbor, how I interact with people on a day-to-day basis. Our e-patients, empowering patients to be the spokespeople for palliative care. There's a lot of things, a lot of the policy work, just so many things that we can that are successes and are amazing things.
I
If
mean, being a fan from the outside, watching, and following the work fairly closely, particularly in the, since I've been in California, one of the things that has really struck me as so extraordinary, about the coalition is its ability to speak both to providers and to patients and the public. Many organizations try to do that, but they end up doing one vastly better than the other. And I really, something I hope I can continue is that strength in speaking to both, and bringing them together into the conversation. So kudos on that.
Yeah, well, thank you for pointing that out. I think of it as like working with the powerhouses, which are the providers and the health systems, but listening to the quiet voices.
Yeah.
I think it's in the quiet voices is where you hear where things, with the loud voices, you can kind of assume everything's working right. But with the quiet voices is when you hear like where the tension points are.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just, for me, it's also been a real importance of, walking the walk and talking the talk. Like this movement to me is about empowering people to be who they are. And so it's important that the organization embody that first in how we meet with people, how we talk to people, how we do our work, how we interact with each other as staff. And that, then colors, how it goes out into the bigger community.
So as you've been, as I know you have been reflecting, on the last 24 years and all of the work, and I can't imagine how difficult it must be for you. I have all the empathy in the world stepping away from this, but what do you see as the biggest opportunities and likewise the biggest challenges ahead for the coalition, for the movement, for the staff?
I think the biggest opportunity for the movement in California is to kind of move into this being baked into the healthcare system more broadly. I feel like in the early days of the coalition, it was kind of like, we're the champion, people didn't really care about it. Like we were, yay, this is important, you should care about it, this is important. And we were just like getting it on the table, right? And then in California, we made a lot of progress with like home-based palliative care. We have health systems that have embraced advanced care planning and created systems. So it's moving more into implementation. So that's a big opportunity to keep that implementation going and more standardized and spread. But I also think with what we're seeing, like with the changes with Medi-Cal and CalAIM, this health system is moving into a more integrated model for our prompted by our aging population and our population with disabilities. This integration of, more like long-term supports and services and healthcare and lay navigators and community health workers. And I think there's an opportunity to build this in, not just as a discrete home-based palliative care program, not just as a conversation in the hospital or other facilities, but really making it part of wherever people are getting care.
And I'm sure there are challenges that you see ahead for us too.
Yes. I mean, there's always challenges, a small but mighty organization. I think coalitions are very powerful, but they're also very fragile. So they can get kind of off track, get thrown off track. Funding is not too obvious for the coalition or any coalition. We have multiple revenue streams, so maintaining those with a small staff while also doing the work. So it just speaks to the importance of our members and our donors, and your support is really key. Another obvious change is with what's happening with the POLST registry. So much opportunity there. And even with some funding from the state to support that POLST expertise, it opens up some new opportunities, but we still need diverse revenue.
Exactly right. So what are your plans? You're gonna kick back and head to the beach, or other than keeping me on track on things.
Yeah, people ask me that, and it's actually a multifaceted question. So it's kind of like, what level do I answer it from? So some of it's just figuring out what's retirement. When you move away from a regular job, you need to come up with a schedule. You need to come up with how do you stay in touch, have social interaction, and what do you do that provides meaning. So I'll be working on that. My husband is planning to retire in a year, so this gives me a year to get ahead of him and get some of my things in place before he's got so much time on his hands. For me, I'm going to kind of see where it goes. I was just talking to a chaplain last night who said to me that when the mind is quiet, the soul speaks. And I feel like, I've been so busy and my mind's so busy with the work that I'm hearing a little bit from my soul saying, there's something else I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know what it is. It's not going to be a traditional job or traditional path. It'll just start out with probably some writing and maybe a blog post and go somewhere great. And if it doesn't, that's fine too.
Well, as long as you keep taking my calls, I don't care where you are.
Absolutely. I've got the little bat phone, right?
Exactly.
Speed dial.
Yeah. Wow.
So Jennifer, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Like,
Okay.
how did you get started in palliative care?
Oh, this is always such an interesting question because it was sort of an accidental evolution. I actually had a full career trajectory completely different in a completely different direction. I had my own business as a book packager. I had a partner and a large group of freelancers, and together we, over 20 years, produced about 600 titles for college and professional level textbook publishers in everything from artificial intelligence to quantum theology. Interestingly, a lot of the books were in health and in healthcare, and I found myself just by virtue of reading the books and in some cases serving as the editor, gaining a bit of, I wouldn't say expertise, but knowledge and interest. In fact, my very first real job was as an editorial assistant in the nursing division at Addison Wesley Publishing Company. So it's funny how these things kind of wrap back around. But that career was going gangbusters. But as a result of some personal experience with loss and with fear, I was getting some spiritual direction, and the spiritual director suggested that, you ever thought about volunteering for hospice? And it's about the last thing I'd ever thought of ever. But I stepped into that and was trained as a volunteer and started doing that and fell in love with the field, with the energy. And that was around the time of the Bill Moyers series, as it was coming in, and all of the work that Robert Wood Johnson had done to build up, awareness on these issues. And it was really coming into the public discourse in a way that had not been there before. And the Nancy Cruzan case and various other things were happening. And I just, as I say, I kind of got bit, and really just more from my own amazement, I started a master's degree in end-of-life studies, and then it suddenly sort of morphed into a career. And the next thing I knew, I was working for the Colorado Center for Hospice and Palliative Care, and kind of wound down my business and went in this other direction, and kind of the rest is history.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of us feel like kind of called to this, like it's meant to be. So, are there any highlights from your past? Your career prior?
I've been reflecting on this, and I think, I feel in some ways like this job has brought me home, to those early days of the work that really attracted me to the field. It's about advanced care planning. It's about being prepared. It's about giving some thought to what you want and don't want, and making sure that people around you understand that. And one of my first big projects for the Colorado Center for Hospice and Palliative Care was as a representative to the Colorado Advanced Directives Consortium. And this was in the wake of the Terri Schiavo case and a couple of sort of spectacular failures on the part of CPR directives and other directives in Colorado that had led a broadly interdisciplinary group of people to come together to say, do we have the right tools? Are they working in the right way? What can we do about this? And that led into a work to completely revamp the CPR regulations so that they were more in line with what the statute actually said. And it brought a consideration of the POLST paradigm to Colorado. We ended up passing legislation for the version that's called the MOST, the medical orders for scope of treatment. And once the legislation was passed, Colorado sadly did not have the wisdom of California, and they did not designate any particular state agency with the authority to be the administrative home or to implement the program for the MOST. So our volunteer consortium ended up having to kind of roll out the education, to roll out the implementation. And I was in a leadership role in that consortium at the time, and put together a all volunteer train the trainer educational program statewide to get the MOST rolled out. We called ourselves the Mostketeers. and that was very invigorating. It was all sideline work, but it was key and very a real sense of accomplishment, when we got that done. So that certainly was a highlight. And more recently, once I came out to California, one of my first consulting gigs out here was with the Alliance for Catholic Healthcare and the several Catholic health systems, which were working on designing a partnership between the health systems and faith communities to better prepare members of the public through the faith communities about the fact that this is what serious illness looks like. These are decisions you're going to need to make. These are the services that might be available to you. And then to prepare the providers to provide those services more robustly. And that came about as the Whole Person Care initiative. And I was very honored to have a role in helping to design that and to sort of get that program up and running. So, what goes around comes around, and really kind of feel like this gig is bringing me back to my roots in some respects.
Yeah, and maybe just say a brief word about your most recent position for any of our members who aren't familiar with that you were recently here, what you were doing most recently.
Yeah, sure. I most recently was serving as executive director of the Cal State University Institute, Shiley Haynes Institute for Palliative Care. The Institute was founded just 10 years ago with the goal of helping to develop the workforce around palliative care, and by providing very high quality, comprehensive education in palliative care for the different disciplines and for teams. Excellent programs, if I may say so. And it's really the Institute offerings kind of occupy an interesting niche that they're developed by a university, with all of the academic rigor and with all of the substance that you would expect from that. But you don't have to apply to the university to take the courses. It's continuing education credits, and the tuition, the registration fees are really very affordable and accessible to a lot of people. And one of the nice things there is that the Institute and the Coalition have a relationship that co-developed some courses in advanced care planning that remain in the catalog. So
yeah, I really feel like this CSU's Shiley Haynes Institute for Palliative Care is the only other organization that really has that focus on the movement in the state of California. Well, of course, our work is nationally relevant, and if not internationally, it's that that focus and that home of California that has been a great partnership with our organizations.
Yeah,
So,
and one of the things that the Institute is really, I think, in its new phase now under new leadership, going to be really bearing down on is working to integrate palliative care content into the undergraduate curricula across the 23 Cal State University campuses. And I have said for years, if that really could be accomplished, it would be transformative, for healthcare in California and indeed nationally.
Yeah, the CSU system, I'm amazed at the number of nurses and social workers, the percentage that they produce. And I remember in the early days of this movement, realizing like, you can't change academia except from within academia.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
So Jennifer, what are some of the trends that you see in the palliative care field?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think sometimes the change, the pace of change can feel so glacial. I mean, here we are, we've both been in this field now for 20, 24 years. And sometimes I'm just gobsmacked at oh my gosh, the issues are just the same. We have made no progress on the X, whatever it might be. But then I step back for a minute and change really has happened, and it can feel very slow, but it is happening. It is continuing to happen. Palliative care, I think, really is becoming the awareness of palliative care as embodying what healthcare really should be about, and how it is not only, core to serious illness care, but it's really core to any variety of care. I spent some time reflecting at the beginning of the pandemic about, well, what possibly could be the role for palliative care in the midst of the greatest acute care infectious disease crisis, across the world. But palliative care was right there at the core of it. Pain and symptom management, thinking about what you want and what you don't want, communication with families and support and spiritual support of the team. This is core to every healthcare practice, and to the whole philosophy of healthcare. So I really do see palliative care continuing to become more fully integrated, with other forms of healthcare. So, that's a theme I see. I know that advanced care planning seems to be, in some ways, a little bit under fire right at the moment, but also there's an opportunity there to revamp the conversation really around who do you want to speak for you and what are your values. Those are the things that are really essential in advanced care planning. So I see that continuing to more fully integrate, into how healthcare is done. There's another trend that I'm a little worried about, and that is what seems to be shaping up as a little bit of a legal assault on our ability, our rights to make decisions about our bodily autonomy in healthcare circumstances. And I don't take that in any way lightly, particularly not only in light of the Dodd decision, but also being aware that the Uniform Determination of Death Act is under reconsideration right at the moment, and will be, that model legislation will be getting rolled out to the states over the next couple of years. And the conversation, the prospect of a lot of conversation around the definition of death and how people make decisions about the end of their lives being opened up in every public square in every state over the next year or two seems a little daunting. But I really see the coalition as a consequence of having potentially a pretty big voice in directing some of that conversation, not only in California, but across the rest of the country, to make sure that we defend the rights and hold the ground.
Yeah, you've been very articulate in some of the writing that you've done about that recent Supreme Court decision, and I feel like California is, it makes our work in California even more important. Not because I think California is going to go backwards, but because we have to hold the line for what is possible with keeping the movement moving forward. That this is the best care possible. That this is culturally congruent, that this is what people of all stripes want.
Absolutely.
So, well, I think in some other states, there's going to be a lot of craziness happening and a lot of angst and some backtracking.
Yeah.
So I think, as you said, California's got that really important role. You know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I see too that all of the opportunities and challenges that you mentioned about, this particular moment for the coalition, as I am learning more very quickly, about what California is doing as a state, I am hugely encouraged. I mean, the master plan for aging is extraordinary. The work that's being done in CalAIM, it just, California can be a bellwether for the rest of the country. It can be a model, it can be a voice. And the fact that good things are happening here makes it, sort of elevates, gives us a taller hill to stand on, a bigger voice, to spread that out to the rest of the country. And I'm really looking forward to the opportunity for the coalition to continue to be the companion on the journey that everyone is taking, through serious illness and the end of life.
Yeah, so I'm just, Jennifer, we want to do a time check. We are open to questions if people want to put them in. Let's just go ahead and keep talking a little bit more. So are there anything else about the opportunities or challenges that you see for the coalition?
Well, we do have a question in the chat, and I'll direct this to you, Judy.
Okay.
Do you see the possibility of California adopting National Post?
So National Post has created a model form. It is a model, it is a template. And the form still is, the program is enacted state by state. So there's no effort to say the model, the national form. It really, again, it's a model for the states. And it was really designed for those states that were having problems politically to get a form that was consistent with the majority of states. California, our form is consistent with the national form. And so there's no urgent need, there's no pressure, there's no reason we have to change. We are looking at making some changes to the California form, like has happened in the past, in light as we move with the registry to an electronic version of the post form that is part of the post registry. People will already have to roll that out. That this is how you do it electronically, and so that's the time to make any tweaks to our current form that we might want to. I would say that leadership, our physician leaders here in California who have guided the POST program since its early days and continue to be actively involved, that when they look at the California form, they still see pieces about it that they believe are superior to the national form. And they have been built into some of the practices that our healthcare system has. So we don't want to lose the good for just changing to be, more technically in just whole cloth adopting the national form. So the national form really isn't designed for states like us. We are in compliance and we do see some tweaking happening.
And I'll just tag on to that when Colorado looked at revising their MOST form in 2015, California was the model that we followed. And the thing that really was most attractive to us was how California phrased the several choices in Section B around goals. It's not about, again, it's not about the particular treatment choices necessarily. It's about your goal, and full treatment is the goal of prolonging life, by any medical means necessary. Selective treatment is the goal of, treating the condition, but minimizing burden and invasive procedures. Comfort focused goal is comfort. It's not to treat or to cure. So, that orientation around goals, I think, is one of the great strengths of the California form.
Yeah. And I think, with the POST registry, there really is going to be this opportunity to revive the POST effort, or to revive is maybe not quite the right word, but to bring another, and the second, yeah, unintended pun, but a second wind to it. You know, in the early days of Pulse, like we kind of didn't really know, we had an idea what we were doing, but we had no idea it was going to be as big as it was. And, you know, CHCF funded us to do some initial work. And then there was this national conference, and we took this whole group of like 8 coalition, you know, 8 local leaders to New Orleans. And I don't, it was just magical how everything came together. And I think one of the highlights you'd asked me before, you know, of this work was getting the Pulse getting an author for the Pulse legislation. We knew that it would go further if it was in legislation, that there'd be more uptake and adoption of it. So I had an idea. I approached a senator who worked in aging. I had, you know, knew the staff a little bit, and then they came back and said, nope, we're not going to author it. But they did help put the draft legislation into the right format. And it was on the last day of bill introduction. Like this was the last day for bills to be introduced. And I was talking to Kate O'Malley, and I said, I don't think we're going to get legislation this year. Today's the last day. She said, well, do you have anybody else that you might approach? And I thought, okay, I've got one idea. So I walked across the street to the Capitol and went to, at that time, Assemblyman Wolk's office and talked to her chief of staff. And I said, you know, explained this. And he's like, you know, I really don't think she's going to be interested in this. And she's not even here today because she's dealing with her mother-in-law who's, you know, needs to change. She's trying to find a place for her to live, but I'll run it by her. Okay, thank you. And then a couple hours later, he called me. He's like, well, I don't get it, but she wants to carry it. And I'm like, woo. And she turned out to be an amazing author, smart, collaborative, and really appreciated that this was bigger than just a piece of legislation.
Well, you caught it right in the moment when life intervenes. I mean, you know, this is the thing about all of this is yeah. Everyone is going to face this at one time or another. You know, I can't think of a field of action that is more relevant, you know, to everyone in the country. We are all, you know, either for ourselves personally or our family members going to be facing exactly this situation. And one of the things that has frustrated me is it still seems there doesn't seem to have been a lot of movement in improving that moment when the person who has never encountered this before suddenly has to make decisions about a loved one or themselves, about, you know, where they're living, how they're being cared for, what treatments they might want. What do you do for the person in that moment? You know, that's the sort of the critical time. But all of this is helping to build, as we like to talk about, an ecosystem, you know, for these decisions to be made easier, for the conversations to be more natural. So
well, I think,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think you hit on a really big trend, which is like more and more people are having experience with this. And that really helps a lot, especially like from a policy standpoint, the policymakers and policy staff having that personal experience, or the leaders in our healthcare system. It just opens up a lot more opportunity. And we all know that when you experience, like just thinking about it intellectually is one thing, but experiencing it is a different factor. So it's another reason we want, you know, the coalition is really important, and we want to be strong to be able to leverage those opportunities as they continue to grow.
Exactly right. So we do have a question in the Q&A here. This one's for me. Why do you say advanced care planning is now under fire? Please clarify. Well, okay. So starting to be about 2 years ago in the fall of the pandemic, Sean Morrison, who is a very, very well-known palliative care physician and researcher, wrote an editorial that was published in the Journal of Palliative Medicine, basically saying that advanced care planning is, how did he put it, plain, simple, and wrong. You know? And his basic point, and I think it's been somewhat misunderstood and misquoted, but his basic point was that, you know, we've been working on advanced care planning since the 60s, you know, or even before. I mean, the first living wills were introduced in the late 60s, but the effort to get people to complete their advanced directives, has really ramped up probably since the 90s and into the 2000s. And the goal is to make sure that you have someone to speak for you when you can't, and say what you want for your treatment preferences, because then therefore that's what you will get. Well, what we've discovered over the many years, and lots and lots and lots of studies and many millions of dollars that have been spent on it, that there's no guarantee, there's no straight line to be drawn between completing an advanced directive and actually getting the care that you want. There's a lot of places in that line where things can go wrong. And Dr. Morrison's basic point was not, I believe, that advanced care planning is pointless, we ought not to do it, as many people have kind of quoted him as saying, but that it's time to move the research dollars onto something else, that rather than trying to do a lot of advanced care planning, to do more contemporaneous goals of care conversations in which the pulse is the natural fit, that we really need to be talking to people in that moment of decision making, and in that moment of when they're having to grapple with these issues, that it doesn't really help to be imagining what I may or may not want 30 years from now. So anyway, I mean, there's been a big controversy in the higher sort of airy levels of the field about whether advanced care planning is even worth it, and whether we're making false promises to people about its efficacy. The way I've kind of come back around to this is to recognize the unequivocal, and I think universally accepted, importance of establishing who is going to speak for me when I can't. And then those rock bottom values of what is most important to me, whether that's today, here, now, or 30 years from now. So there's a lot of discussion going on about the utility and the efficacy of advanced care planning, but the issue is not going away. So I hope that's helpful to clarify that point.
I think that's really well stated, Jennifer.
There's a question probably in here also probably for you, Judy. What and how do we do more of the listening to many quiet voices out there? This is someone who really loves the quiet voices metaphor. So how do we do more of that?
Well, I think that, keeping in mind all the diverse populations that we have in California, and I'm not talking about just traditionally, like how we traditionally think of diversity. So there's just so many factors that determine, so many. It's not just a race and ethnicity. It's much more than that. It's ability, status, it's age, it's family configuration, it's immigrant status, many things. So we want to always keep that in mind. We also have, palliative care is a full age continuum. We often, the master plan for aging is great. At the same time, we've got, the youngest babies, some of them that need palliative care. And so always trying to keep in mind that perspective. And the coalition we do pursue grants that will help us work with different populations. We have a project now with the developmental disability community and helping to build these conversations into the annual planning process that most people with developmental disabilities participate in. Thinking about, how do we have our cultural humility and competency model, and building that. We always build that into our work. Engaging having patients, we just want to keep doing these kinds of things, of having scholarships so patients can come to our conference and be part of this conversation. They can serve on our advisory group. They can be part of our, leadership with our projects. So Jennifer, do you have some thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm reminded constantly of the slogan that I think it was the disability rights community came up with some years ago. Nothing about us without us, and that's kind of a slogan that I would like to adopt, for the coalition, which it has always done, but also, to very, very intentionally ensure that we are bringing the people's voice, to the providers, to the plans, to the policies, so that we're not forgetting, who it is that we're talking about, and to make sure that we are embracing all of the dimensions of diversity. As you mentioned, it's not just one thing, and any one of us is a member of about 10 different cultures at once, and how to understand what the influences of that are, and also to ensure that there is representation at the table and in the projects that we're doing and in the products that we're producing.
Yeah, and I think another piece is honoring that fact that people usually have the best solution to whatever their issue is. And I think for the coalition, that's an important part of our local coalition work. That it's important to have people in the local community who are taking what we do at the state level and bringing it out to their community, and that people from whatever community, that's kind of more like a geographic focus, but also, there's the Chinese American Coalition for Compassionate Care, and we were so honored to be able to help them to get started. And really, it's the people from any particular community. They have a lot of wisdom. It's not us coming and telling them what to do. It's us, helping to support them, perhaps, seeing a vision and knowing what is available, not recreating the wheel if the wheel works, but it really needs to be owned by the local community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to connecting with the local coalitions and learning more about what it is that they're doing and what particular needs they're seeing bubbling up from their communities, and how we can be responsive to that.
Yeah, that really has been a hallmark of our work, partly, because California is such a big state, and we have people, throughout the state. I remember in the early days of Pulse, we kind of talked to national leaders like, well, we think we should have this local coalition model. And they kind of were like, well, why? So, but, it depends on the state's demographics, and it has worked really well. We are blessed in California with the number of palliative care leaders that we have. So the size is a challenge, but it's also a blessing. I see we have another question in the chat, and this is asking, how do you see the coalition's efforts for advanced care planning interfacing and supporting work to bring advanced care planning to people with mental illness? What can the coalition do to help raise awareness of state probate advanced healthcare directive form recently amended to emphasize mental health? So I feel like there's two questions there. Maybe I'll start a little bit
Sure.
with, I don't know. One I think is broader and one's a little bit more technical. So I'm going to just start with the broad one, and that is there's awareness and there's a trend and interest within the mental health community to take this concept of planning in advance for a healthcare emergency and putting it down in an advance directive, so that when that crisis happens and you don't have capacity to speak for yourself, that the advance directive guides care. So I'm just going to point out, it's ironic when there's at the time that there's this criticism coming from the palliative care community to some extent. But I also think it is a really big opportunity. It's a trend overall that we're seeing, this idea of advanced care planning and getting the information you need to anticipate future medical, I don't want to just say situations because it's not like hypothetical, but if you have a medical condition, how is that likely to progress? So getting information so that you can think about it, and to the extent you have feelings, being able to put it down in writing, get it honored. And also the sense of that healthcare should be focusing on what matters most. That healthcare, it's not just about doing treatments. It's not just about informing people, well, this is what we recommend, and these are the benefits and the risks. It's taking that shared decision-making and taking it to the next level, that partnership between the healthcare providers and the individual to really, just make that a part of healthcare in many, many ways. So I do think there's a lot of opportunities for the coalition to partner with the activities and leaders that are already working on this in the mental health arena. And I'm just going to say it's kind of a broad statement, but Jennifer and I will be chatting more about like what exactly are those next steps that we can do. And for people who don't know, there was a law enacted that goes into effect January 1st that amends the statutory form. So if you, there's, as you know, there's many different versions of the advanced directive, and many of them are legal in California. And the statutory form, it does make it clear that you can put in there your wishes, not just about physical care, but also about mental health care. So, you know, we'll continue to get the word out through our newsletters and our website and other places where we're talking about policy changes.
So this might be an interesting wrap-up question for us in the chat. What will you miss most work-related now that you're retiring? Will you miss anything at all?
Well, you know, I love seeing the names on these questions. Like, I love you all. Yes. And yes, I would love to interact with all of you daily. So I don't know, some of it, I'm not sure until I get to the other side of this to know. But it's been just a lot of fun. It's been very rewarding. I often say, you know, the best people work in the Paths of Care movement, and it's been such a blessing. And I think it's because we're all working for this higher vision. To me, you know, we may not all think of it as spiritual, but I do think of it as that essence of who we are, of helping us and other people really live in alignment with who we are and honoring that person and being able to live your best life possible. So yeah, it's going to be a shift. I know Jennifer talked about, you know, although I didn't technically, you know, the handoff, and although technically I didn't start the coalition, I really have shaped it into the organization that it is and crafted it into, you know, the values and the work and the team that we have. So it's kind of weird not to be thinking that I'm not going to be intimately involved in that day to day. At the same time, like I said, I think there's this quiet voice that's saying there's something else. There's so much changing in the world right now. And I really feel that palliative care is a microcosm of the change that needs to happen more broadly in society and the world. That all of these, the values that are embodied in palliative care of listening to the person, of working as a team, of focusing on what's really important, that those are, I see analogies to what we really need to see happen in the world more broadly. So I just try to focus on, you know, the future and where things are going, and hopefully it's all going to be in a positive way. And I think at this point, we have choices. We're probably feeling it with things that are happening in this world. You know, there's lots to be frustrated and upset and angry about. At the end of the day, I know I feel better if I don't spend time obsessing and wallowing those, but feeling hopeful that, you know, maybe this is leading to something better, because we know it wasn't like a perfect world before some of these current tensions arose.
Well, I'll ask a real quick question. Jennifer, what are you looking forward to?
Well, I mean, it really kind of feels like getting back to my roots. I'm thrilled so far with the quality of the people, you know, at the organization. So kudos to Judy for bringing on good folks, and the commitment and the dedication. And I know that's present in the membership as well. I'm really looking forward to getting more familiar with California policy around this. That was one area that I was somewhat sheltered from at the Institute. We were pretty focused entirely on education. So the policy part is, I'm ready to dive back into that in a big way. And just as I mentioned earlier, I just, the coalition has such a unique footprint and role in the state, and looking forward to continuing to strengthen that and continuing to establish it as the companion on the journey. I think that's just really the best way that I can phrase it to myself, and looking forward to getting my teeth into it.
Yeah, just kind of adding to that, I think for me, in some ways I've been kind of thinking about how does this transition happen? Because, nobody's going to work forever, right? And a few years ago, I kind of felt like, the organization had we'd grown enough as far as like the work, that we were very complex, but we didn't have a lot of resources for it. And I felt like, even if I came into it a few years ago, like I wouldn't be able to do it. So I started kind of thinking, how do we change things internally so that there becomes a stability that it could be handed off to somebody, and it could be successful. And so there's things that we've been doing kind of behind the scenes with the way that staffing is structured, with having, some of the operational work not land on the CEO position so much, to free up the CEO to do that more higher level work. And then another big piece was this transition that's happening. So with the Pulse registry and the potential there with the funding from the state, again, it shifts the organization from focusing so much on just grants and foundation priorities, which have served us really well in many, many ways. This now, with this shift to a broader contract with the core funding to focus on Pulse more broadly in the ACP ecosystem, I think allows the coalition to be a little bit more selective about what it is that's going to prioritize. And I think, who we interact with, talking about the quiet voices, and maybe, we can have grants, but maybe there's other ways that we can build those kinds of things in. So I'm excited about how things happen. Well, then the third piece, which was Jennifer. So being here in the state, having the background that she has, having time, getting to know California and the leaders and the palliative care community, and then it being the right time for her to transition from her position with CSU Shiley Haynes Institute. So I feel I just keep focusing on, I think the planets are aligned here. And so, the coalition, in a lot of ways, it is an act of faith. Running it is an act of faith. If you just think logically, like, we would not exist, for sure. There's many, many times we would have just not continued on. So that faith, and that there's something bigger in the world, I think, that wants to come out and come through the coalition. And it is the members and the donors and the other people who are part of this movement. It is your desire to change things, to see this transformation, that is the energy that the coalition gives us, the life of the coalition, and that it continues on.
It's the gas in our tank. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well, thank you, ladies. We're just about at 1 o'clock. Any final words?
Just ready to roll
Great.
up the sleeves and get ready.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you all. Lots of love to all of you.
See you soon.